Last July in Texas, 4 people were murdered in separate attacks within 15 minutes. In Houston, Mark CHYNOWETH was shot dead behind the counter of his second-hand store.
We do not know what the motive for it is. We have been told by several persons that he was a member of some type of a fraternal organization and that this possibly may be tied into his killing.
2 of his brothers were killed in the other shootings. They were the latest in a series of at least 25 murders that have terrorized the closed community of fundamentalist Mormons who practice polygamy as a way of showing their devotion to God. The murders are thought to be the work of an extreme group led by this man, Orville LeBaron, self-styled prophet and patriarch. His group has been killing in God's name for the last 20 years in the western United States. Orville LeBaron was the youngest of 7 sons in a rigidly fundamentalist Mormon family. In 1955, when he was 28, LeBaron and his brother Joel created their own church.
Orville LeBaron was a very charismatic character and had the knowledge, the self-assured knowledge that he was a prophet of God. People look for that. People want to believe that. People are looking for something, and they find it in people like Orville.
30 years ago, THELMA CHYNOWETH was searching for a new religion. She turned to the teachings of Orville LeBaron. She is the mother of 2 of the men murdered last year in Texas.
It was Orville who converted me. I first heard about him and Joel from my brother. But when he and Joel came to my home and I visited with them, then I spent quite a lot of time with Orville, going through various scriptures, and that's how I became converted.
For THELMA, conversion to the LeBaron Church was a major decision. The brothers had set themselves up in a poor village in Mexico. THELMA uprooted her whole family from Utah to join the new movement. Her daughter Rena was 8 at the time.
We had no electricity, and we had no indoor plumbing. Of course, no phones. It was just desert, and we lived in a little shack we threw together until we could build a house. It was a completely different lifestyle, but we did that because we thought it was God's will, and this is where our leaders had told us to go, because that's where God was going to have his saints gather to get out of the United States, which was Babylon, and to get out of the United States before it was destroyed.
Within a few years, Rena CHYNOWETH was herself to be nearly destroyed by her involvement with Orville LeBaron. She was sucked into his distorted world where deep religious conviction was corrupted to become murderous fanaticism. The LeBaron group's fanaticism is rooted in the history of the state of Utah. This desolate landscape is home to the mainstream Mormon church and to several fundamentalist splinter groups. Early in the turbulent history of the Mormon church, believers were driven by persecution to settle this barren land.
The hour is drawing close. I know it, and many others know it. We're going to have to be judged. And everything that have been prophesied will be fulfilled, because God will not let...
There are about 30,000 fundamentalist Mormons in groups with widely differing views, but they are all united by a belief in the godliness of polygamy, and they resent the way it's condemned by the outside world.
If you feel that you're persecuted for doing right, God bless you. Why in the world would a man want a plural wife? Want to take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 women and support them and their children when women are walking the streets begging for companionship and you don't have to marry them? Just go have them, turn them loose, take care of yourself, feed yourself, everything else. Plural marriage, celestial marriage as we call it, is not for sex. We have entirely a different attitude toward it entirely. Because just like I said, if it was sex that we wanted, you can get it anywhere, free, everywhere. Even if you had to buy it, it would be cheaper than it is to support a family. I support an enormous family, but I love my women. They are my jewels from heaven, and so are my posterity. And sex is way down the line in importance.
Polygamy wasn't part of the Mormon Church when it was first founded in 1830. Joseph Smith, a 24-year-old farmer's son from New York State, claimed an angel had given him the basis of a new religion, the Book of Mormon. It was only some years later that Smith claimed a revelation from God demanding the practice of polygamy or plural marriage. At first, many of Smith's own followers balked at the very idea. Some believed it was his appreciation for a well-turned ankle that prompted him to claim the revelation. He once admitted,
"Whenever I see a pretty woman, I have to pray for grace."
Smith's first wife, Emma, doubted that his motives were entirely religious. She said,
"I am determined that a stop shall be put to these things."
She didn't succeed. Smith took numerous wives. Polygamy became a way of life for his inner circle of most trusted followers, much to the delight of satirical cartoonists. By the 1840s, puritanical America had come to regard polygamy as barbaric. The new faithful who stuck together and voted together were hounded from New York to Missouri and then to Illinois, where Joseph Smith was lynched by a mob. Led then by his Lieutenant Brigham Young, the Latter-day Saints, as they called themselves, fled further west to a new beginning. The grueling trek across the mountains, now idealized through images of heroic pioneers struggling to reach the promised land, has become an integral part of the folklore of the new religion. Finally, in July 1847, Brigham Young, the new prophet, looked down on the arid Salt Lake Valley and declared, "This is the place." Now, plural marriage became a doctrine for all Mormons, not just the leaders, and Brigham Young urged the entire church to practice polygamy for the Lord, to populate the new territory. And for the next 40 years, all the faithful responded. But increasingly, the practice was criticized by the rest of America. Eventually, the federal government threatened that Utah would be denied statehood if the Mormons continued to sanction plural marriage. So the Mormon Church compromised and embraced monogamy and statehood in 1890. It was a controversial decision that split the church irrevocably. For nearly 100 years, all marriages conducted in Mormon temples have been monogamous. Polygamists or fundamentalists are excommunicated. They're not even allowed to enter Mormon temples. But still, the church has to fight to shake off the legacy of its polygamous past. At the Visitors Center alongside the temple in Salt Lake City, an efficient public relations machine puts across the Mormon message. The church assiduously promotes its respectable Christian image.
I am Jesus Christ. Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. Walk in the meekness of my spirit, and you shall have peace in me.
Today, the monogamist Mormon Church is one of the fastest growing Christian denominations in the world. It's consolidated its immense power and wealth here in Salt Lake City. Meanwhile, after the bitter split, the fundamentalists were scattered and driven underground. They formed several polygamous groups throughout the infant state, But still they were harassed both by the federal government and by the official Mormon church.
Remote among towering cliffs in a wild and barely accessible region called the Strip, the little farming community of Short Hills becomes a national sensation.
The harassment reached its height in the 1940s and 50s.
Living cooperatively under 3 elders, some of the 33 men arrested are alleged to have half a dozen wives and 30 children. And among the 86 women taken are many child brides. The colony includes 263 children, among them young men who saw service in Korea. Hardworking and law-abiding in every other way, plural marriage, they claim, is part of their religion.
At the time of the FBI raids, MABEL ALLRED was one of the wives of the polygamist leader Rulon ALLRED. Her daughter and granddaughter aren't fundamentalists, and they find it incredible that MABEL, her husband, and sister wives were arrested for their beliefs.
I woke up on Tuesday morning, and my other sister wife knocked on the door at my upstairs bedroom and said, "MABEL, the FBI has surrounded the house. Will you please come down to Myrtle's bedroom? We're going to have prayer." And so I did. And I went downstairs, and in the living room, there were several FBI agents, and my husband was there, and his face was so white because it was really a shocking experience. And outside, there were numerous cars and FBI men, plain clothes and otherwise.
What were the charges that they brought against you, Mama?
Mine was for playing the piano in our meetings of our people who had been ostracized from the church.
Short Hills, scene of the raids, now renamed Colorado City, is an isolated strip of desert straddling the Utah-Arizona state line, 300 miles from Salt Lake City. Some 4,000 people live here. It's still a fundamentalist community, close and inward-looking. While visitors aren't discouraged, few strangers linger in the town. Nowadays, providing they keep a low profile, the polygamists are left alone. The raids of 40 years ago proved that the law against polygamy could not be enforced. There were too many wives and children to take into care, and the whole procedure became too costly for the state.
This is an area where the fundamentalist people have some holdings, and then where they can live their religion and according to their own beliefs. And we believe America is big enough and great enough that people can live according to their dictates of their own conscience. And even though it's taken we've had to go through a lot of persecution and other things, presently we're able to live our religion without too much contradiction.
Daniel Barlow is the grandson of John Barlow, an early leader of one of the largest of the traditional sects. He's a polygamist, and his family run the town of Colorado City. He's the mayor, his brother is the sheriff, another brother runs the fire service. Although less than half the men in the town actually live with plural wives, all in the town believe in the principle.
Plural marriage is strictly a religious concept. And many people believe in the concept, but have not had the opportunity or the privilege of living in plural marriage yet. But it doesn't mean they don't believe in it. And of course, every man is a monogamist before he's a polygamist. So young men, as they come up, may just have one wife and look forward to the time that they can have another family.
The Harwells are polygamists. First wife Opal was joined by sister wife Anne after 6 years of monogamous marriage. Unlike some fundamentalists, they all live in the same house with their growing family of 9 children. They had little money, but they intend to have many more children as dictated by their beliefs. According to Bill Harwell, polygamy isn't an easy option.
When you put two women together in the same house that are sharing the same husband, it has a tendency sometimes to create difficulties, as you can imagine. Unless you have two people that are willing to enter into this practice willingly and openly, you're going to have problems. At times, you know, jealousies do come up or difficult situations, and if I start playing favorites or something like that, then that definitely creates a large problem. So I have to be very careful in how I act and what the things that I say.
That's my hat! Hat, Scarf! Come on, Deanna! Come on!
Colorado City is a closely knit community. It's resisted the invasion of current American culture.
We really try to be a little more modest in our lives, and so our ladies folks wear a little more modest type dresses, and some people have television. Of course, people can have television if they want, but a lot of the people don't even have television in their homes, recognizing that the influence that television brings into your home.
Do you think you're cutting your children off from an outside world?
No, absolutely not. Our children come and go throughout the area, and they're exposed to everything that need to be or want to be exposed to.
Why are the girls playing soccer in dresses, not in shorts?
We don't strip down for our activities. In fact, our school, we have a good physical education program, and they enjoy themselves like this, but we don't actually have a place where they turn out for the games.
The children of Colorado City are growing up within the enclosed world of fundamentalism. When Orville LeBaron's church first started, it was based on similar principles. Fleeing from harassment in the United States, the LeBarons had set up their own church in Mexico. Over the years, their community became even more isolated and inward-looking than those that remained behind. In 1975, at the age of 49, Orville LeBaron, self-proclaimed prophet, deemed it was God's will that Rena CHYNOWETH should become his 13th wife.
Well, he'd been after me since I was about 12 years old. Of course, they start early pursuing the girls at a very young age in polygamous societies. He wasn't the only one, but he was very persistent. I didn't want anything to do with him. In that respect, I felt respect for him as a leader and as a prophet, but I didn't want anything to do with him. I did not want to marry him.
How did you feel when Orville started to pay attention to your daughter? Tell me about that.
I was angry.
Tell me about that.
I was extremely angry because she was very young, and I just thought it was totally unnecessary for him to be doing such a thing. He claimed that he had her father's permission, but I believe he had just rather assumed it.
Orville's lieutenant, Daniel Ben Jordan, found the means to persuade Rena while her parents were away.
Dan took me to the side, out to his car, and he sat me down and he turned to me and he said, "Either you marry Orville today or you will go to hell." That's it. I mean, it was like, what was I to choose from, hell or marrying a man that I didn't love? So I didn't want to go to hell. So I married him. I was 16 years old, and I was not a very pretty bride. My eyes had to have been very, very swollen. I cried for hours.
Well, later I didn't feel so seriously about it because she was older, and she was sort of at loose ends. And I didn't know that it wasn't the will of God. I didn't know it was, but I didn't know it wasn't either. And I didn't feel upset.
For many fundamentalist women, plural marriage is a source of great happiness. June, Linda, Beth, and Shirley are all married to the same man, Tom Green.
Yeah, I don't have any money.
To avoid going out to work, they take in sewing at home. They say they're a sisterhood which shares cooking, childcare, and work for the family. They also share Tom.
We'd rather have 25% of a 100% man than to have 100% of a 25% man.
And is Tom 100%?
Absolutely.
All the way.
We think he is.
How old are you, Linda?
17.
And how long have you been married?
About 3 years. I was in love and wanted to be married and didn't see any reason I should wait, you know, because there wasn't anything for me to learn. I was ready to be a wife and a mother.
Confusingly, all four wives are related to each other by more than just marriage.
June is my mother, and Beth is my aunt, and Linda is Beth's daughter. So
we're cousins.
Some people might find that rather strange that kind of you and your mother are married to the same man.
Well, I married him first, and about a year after I had been married, then she got married to him.
What did you think of that?
I thought it was neat. I was hoping it would happen when I got married to him.
Such complex family relationships are unusual even among fundamentalists. The Green family belonged to a small fundamentalist sect near Salt Lake City. Their patriarch and religious leader is Ross LeBaron, Erville's brother. Unlike Erville, Ross is an amiable eccentric who abhors violence. His followers respect his God-given authority because his great-grandfather was a close associate of Joseph Smith. According to Ross, Smith gave his great-grandfather the authority known as keys to be a patriarch. These keys, Ross claims, have been handed down to him.
Well, I hold the same priesthood that Abraham held in his time, that Noah held in his time, Enoch held in his time, and even what Adam held in his time. We're supposed to do a total revision of the religion of the world and reorganize and prepare a people for the coming of Christ in glory. And I am the last head prophet to be doing this.
However, Joel and Erville, Ross's brothers, disputed his claims, saying they had been given authority to hold the keys.
And now there's about 3 or 4 factions of what Joel was doing, and there's several factions in what I'm doing already. I have several hundred followers, and there's several factions besides that.
How do people know which is the true church then? How do people choose between the factions?
They don't know. That's a problem.
In 1970, there was a faction fight between Erville and Joel. They both believed that God had decreed that one day there should be a new law known as civil law based on the 10 Commandments. But unlike Joel, Erville was convinced that the law should be enforced immediately.
We did a lot of very serious studying. My husband and my son Mark and I spent days and weeks and hours every day studying everything we could find that had anything to do with this. And we were trying at first to prove that Erville was wrong because we couldn't see how Joel could be. We just thought he was infallible. But the more we studied, the more we could see that Joel was the one who was in the wrong on this subject.
Erville moved away to set up his own church, the Church of the Lamb of God. He was convinced that civil law gave him the right to kill in God's name.
Erville taught that once you had been taught the civil law or the 10 Commandments and their true meaning and application, you were then subject to those laws. And if you strayed from those commandments, he felt that it was his duty to see that you received the punishment. He felt that he had the keys and the authority from God to administer those punishments.
Ervil justified murder through the doctrine of blood atonement first spelled out by Brigham Young. According to the doctrine, some sins are so grievous that Christ cannot redeem the sinners. Murderers, adulterers, and dissenters can only be saved and go to heaven if they are killed and their blood spilt. Many believe that it was this doctrine that set off Ervil's chain of murders.
It's not a practice that is followed by the church anymore. The church has disavowed that practice. But there is a group of people out there, the polygamists, the fundamentalists, who still believe that. And those are the reasons that some of these crimes have occurred. Those are the reasons that Ervil commits the murders the way he commits the murders, with the coup de grace, shot to the head.
The first of Ervil's murders was in 1972 when his brother Joel was killed. Ervil claimed he'd had a revelation that his brother was a false prophet. The man ordered to do the killing was Ervil's lieutenant, Daniel Ben Jordan. Jordan was held in jail in Ensenada, Mexico. But although he was the prime suspect in Joel's murder, the case was never brought to trial because no one would testify against him.
I don't believe I'll have any statement to make at this time. I do thank you for coming down. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Jordan, are you surprised at your capture?
I won't have any comment to make at this time. Thank you very much.
Daniel Ben Jordan had been an early convert to Ervil's cause and as such had all the zeal of a religious fanatic. Other converts were more detached.
How then did you view Joel's death when he was killed?
I was very astonished and upset. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea that might happen.
Nevertheless, Thelma and her family continued to believe in Ervil. They stayed in his church even though the killings escalated into a reign of terror.
There was fire all around her.
On Christmas Eve 1974, Ervil sent a hit squad to attack Joel's settlement in Los Molinos. Dick Forbes of the Salt Lake City District Attorney's Office has spent years investigating the LeBarons.
When they arrived in the evening, they set the church on fire, and as the people in the town ran out to put out the fire, they shot at them with .30-30 rifles. They killed 2 people, wounded another 10 or 12, firebombed several of the homes, and then left town.
Over the next 3 years, Ervil extended his operations to Salt Lake City, where loyal followers handed out tracts of his writings. By this time, he's thought to have ordered at least 5 more murders, including one in his own family.
He commanded people to be executed or threatened to execute anyone that didn't agree with him or live the civil law. It got to where it wasn't just the civil law, it was not agreeing with him, whether it was civil law or not. It got pretty scary.
Were you scared?
I was scared to go to hell and to have my blessings taken away from me for all the sacrificing I had done. I was motivated to do what he wanted done because I didn't want to be punished.
Repent and live the constitution of the political kingdom of God, lest the sword of the Lord fall upon you. Repent ye therefore, or suffer destruction at the hand of God. This threat, scrawled on the back of one of Ervil LeBaron's pamphlets, was sent to MABEL ALLRED's husband, Rulon. Rulon Allred was the leader of one of the largest fundamentalist groups. The press speculated that Ervil saw him as a rival.
We felt very indignant that they would call my husband a rival of Ervil LeBaron. Nothing could be farther from the truth.
Right.
And we'd like people to know that there was no rivalry on Rulon's part at all. He wanted nothing to do with him, that's all.
But in 1977, LeBaron followed up his threat. He claimed to have had a revelation from God decreeing that the two prettiest women should be dispatched to kill Rulon Allred. A popular naturopathic doctor, Allred had his surgery in a quiet Salt Lake City suburb. The two women arrived as he was treating patients.
Approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon, two young women entered Dr. Allred's office. One of the young women raised a small automatic pistol, fired 5 or 6 times, striking Dr. Allred. They then walked out of the office. Shortly after that, the second person walked back into the office, placed a gun of a larger caliber by his head, fired 1 round, and then they both left the office, where they were met by some of the young male followers of Ervil's.
Murray City Police tonight say they have no leads yet on who the two women were who entered the office of polygamous leader Rulon Allred and shot him dead. Among the suspects.
In the immediate aftermath of Allred's murder, the close fundamentalist community in Utah was horrified. His brother Owen became the group spokesman.
Dr. Allred always advocated peace, love to his fellow men, and in no wise retaliated for evil. He was not trying to compete with anyone. If there are those who advocate violence, I resent the fact that I resent it very much that we are in any way classified to be with them.
One of the two women suspects was 19-year-old Rena CHYNOWETH, Ervil LeBaron's youngest wife. 18 months later, she was tried with 4 others for the murder of Dr. Allred. They were all acquitted.
The reason they were acquitted, prosecutors believe that the juries were scared. The juries were frightened. After the homicide, Ervil had gone south to Mexico. He was on the lam. They didn't have any idea how large his following was, and they were scared.
Today, Rena CHYNOWETH cannot be retried for that crime. She justifies her involvement in the murder by claiming she had no alternative.
I was told that it was God's will and that I had to do it if I wanted to have all these wonderful blessings, and that God wanted me, specifically, me, to do a certain act, and I did it, and I never spoke about it with anyone. And there were probably others who would brag about things that they had done in the past. I did it. I didn't talk about it. I completely repressed it in my own subconscious and denied it to myself. That's the only way I could deal with it at that time.
How do you deal with it now?
I've had to deal with it now by going back and reliving it, which is very hard, very painful.
In 1979, unable to prove Rena's guilt, the prosecution did establish that although he hadn't actually pulled the trigger, the person ultimately responsible for the murder was Ervil LeBaron.
I think that Ervil wanted control over Rena, and the homicide was one way to do that. Rena was one of Ervil's favorite wives. And I think that Ervil saw her as needing to commit an act of good faith, to essentially to indoctrinate her into the group, and in order to give Ervil a hold over her.
6 months later, Ervil himself was finally brought to court. Dick Forbes had led a 2-year investigation to capture his man, and in the course of Ervil's stay in jail, was one of the few policemen to get close to him.
Ervil was rather quiet for a small period of time. He desperately wanted to tell us why he was doing the things that he was doing. He was very sincere in his beliefs about what he taught, as far as the kingdom of God and as far as his authority and as far as how things should be established on this earth. He, for example, believed that he was a member of the Godhead and that he was the ruler over the government of the United States and that the president merely served at his beckoning.
Ervil was found guilty of ordering Rulon Allred's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. It was only then that Thelma and Rena were able to break away from his influence.
I had to take it a step at a time and see this wasn't right and that wasn't right. And I just made a big boo-boo. And I have to admit it. I don't like being wrong. I'm stubborn and I'm rather proud. I don't make very many mistakes, and I really made a great one. And it's hard for me to say, hey, I blew it through a big share of my life.
It's shocking now to look back and see what we were brainwashed into doing. But we were in a position where we really had no choice. It was imposed on us, either do this or die. That was basically it.
How do groups like that keep people? How do they keep followers?
I think when they get that radical, as ours was, it's pretty hard to get new members. You have to kind of be born into it and have it bred into you, and then not have anywhere else to go.
Our Father in heaven, by the authority of thy holy priesthood, we lay our hands upon this child to give it a blessing and a name by which it will be known upon the records of thy church and throughout life.
From cradle to grave, fundamentalist groups isolate themselves from the rest of society. It is perhaps this isolation that can drive some of them over the edge into fanaticism.
Both in mind and body.
Fred Collier is the patriarch and leader of the Harwell family. They've never belonged to the LeBaron group, and they resent the bloody label that the LeBarons have brought to fundamentalism. Nevertheless, Fred Collier doesn't condemn fanaticism.
Amen.
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 I guess to the world, the word fanatic is a bad word. To me, it's not a bad word. To me, a fanatic is someone who believes in something enough to live that way. If he believes in it and he lives that way, that makes him a fanatic, I guess, by standards of the world.
Baseball.
Okay, and what is this? Bat.
I have to say it myself.
All right, okay.
Bat.
Fundamentalists try to keep their children away from the corrupting influences of the modern world. The Harwell children don't go to school. They're taught at home by one of the wives.
They have enough brothers and sisters, and they're going to have lots more brothers and sisters, that they have the interaction with other children and they learn to get along, and I think it's more important for them to learn to get along with their brothers and sisters and have them as their best friends than children outside of the home.
The Colliers seek to uphold their fundamentalist tradition in order to pass it on intact to their children. But in the seclusion of Mexico, Ervil LeBaron's church corrupted the fundamentalist heritage and teachings. When Ervil was imprisoned, some of his 55 children were left to fend for themselves, while others kept in touch with their father.
Those were very, very young people when Ervil was in prison. They went to visit him. He gave them, commissioned them to carry on his work, gave them some power and authority of something that made them feel that they were in charge and they had these things to do. The ones who are still alive now were only maybe 13 or 14 years old or younger at that time. They were not old enough to be able to stand against what they were told by their father.
Ervil's elder sons, Heber, Andrew, and Aaron, were among those who visited him. 2 years after his trial, Ervil died in prison, but he left instructions for his sons which ensured that he would continue killing from beyond the grave.
From what I've been able to learn, Ervil wrote a book of new covenants, he calls it. What it essentially is a hit list. It's a hit list of people who Ervil felt had betrayed him, had abandoned the church, had abandoned his teachings. And these were people who had wronged themselves in his eyes.
Chief among those whom Ervil considered traitors to the cause was his former right-hand man, Daniel Ben Jordan. After Ervil's imprisonment, he left the group and went to live peacefully in Colorado. There, 2 of Ervil's wives joined his business. For 6 years, it seemed that the Jordan clan had escaped Ervil's vengeance until, in October 1987, Jordan took some of his family on an annual deer hunting trip.
In his deer hunting camp were a number of the children of Ervil LeBaron. Those children had come to Dan Jordan back just prior to October and had asked for sanctuary, had said they were starving, they'd been living in Mexico, that their older brothers had abandoned them and they needed help, that Dan was a friend of their father's and would he take them in. Dan did. Dan and his wives took the children of Ervil LeBaron in. When they went deer hunting, in the party was Aaron LeBaron, one of Ervil's sons, 20 years old, and an unknown number of younger siblings. On October 16th, 1987, Dan Jordan left the main camp and walked into the woods. People heard gunshots. He was found shot to death, number of gunshot wounds to the chest and a single gunshot wound to the head, sort of the LeBaron trademark, the coup de grace. Aaron LeBaron is the prime suspect in that homicide.
No one has been able to prove Aaron LeBaron guilty of Daniel Ben Jordan's murder. 2 days after the killing, Aaron was conspicuously present at Jordan's funeral. He was intent on taking on Ervil's mantle.
Right after they'd put Dan Jordan in the grave, they went back to one of the houses in the compound. Aaron LeBaron stood up and announced himself the leader of the clan, the patriarch of the family, and began making some orders that the Jordan family took as threatening.
County Jail.
David 164, 1505.
Detective Joe Dempsey had never heard of the LeBarons until he was called out by the Jordan wives to their house the night of Aaron's attempted takeover.
This is their house coming up here on the left. As you can see, they got a pretty big piece of property. And the night we came out here, the final outcome, we had 36 guns in the house and 21 people. Actually, 21 plus Aaron LeBaron, who was eventually arrested. The situation was extremely tense. We believed, and to this day I believe, that if Aaron had stayed here or if we had not taken Aaron into custody, someone would have been shot by morning.
Aaron LeBaron had failed in his attempt to take over the Jordan clan. He was arrested on the minor charge of disturbing the peace, but even on that charge he managed to get off because the Jordan wives withdrew their complaints. They feared further LeBaron vengeance.
As far as our inability to prosecute, we're talking not of a gang of strangers that unite. We are talking about blood brothers and sisters. Ervil had 55 children from some 13 wives. So each of the young people involved in this case are brothers and sisters, and they're very loyal to each other. There's a very strong blood tie there. They're very reluctant to cooperate with the police in any of the investigations.
Since Daniel Ben Jordan's death, the killings have continued. Last year in Houston, an 8-year-old girl was one of 4 victims in a series of coordinated shootings. The victims were all members of the CHYNOWETH family. They'd been linked with several murders themselves, but they'd left the LeBaron church to start a new life away from the violence. No one has been charged with these murders, but LeBaron's sons and daughters are the prime suspects.
Since Ervil died, the homicides have continued. Portions of the family have continued on with Erbil's beliefs, have picked up the sword essentially, and have continued the killing.
Those who remained faithful to Erbil and continued being taught his doctrine even after his death, they continued the killing. And because of that, I've lost my sister, 2 brothers, and an 8-year-old niece, and other friends and people who left when we did.
Such was her fear of the LeBarons that Rena did not even attend her brother's funeral.
There are some who aren't here, who would like to be here. They're concerned for their safety.
Your brother Victor?
Yes.
Your sister Rena?
Yes.
It's no mistake that when Dwayne Chynoweth was murdered in Texas last summer, that he was killed on the only street in Houston, Texas named Rena Street. That was considered to be a message to Rena that she's next.
The deaths in Texas threatened to bring the stigma of murder back to the peaceful, devout fundamentalists of Utah, something they bitterly resent.
We feel upset that when something happens out of the way, and very often murder is involved, that it's a polygamous group that has done it, like Erbil LeBaron's family, and others who have brought a bad name to polygamists in Utah. And people on the outside, or even in Utah, would like to clump us all together in one class, and we are not.
But it's not just fundamentalists who bear the stigma. The latest killings all occurred on the 144th anniversary of the death of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church. It's a link that the monogamist Mormons don't relish. This year, LeBaron's oldest sons were taken into police custody. Meanwhile, in Salt Lake City, 6 of the younger LeBaron children were taken into care. Since then, they've disappeared.
The young children who are involved in the LeBaron family now have been on the run with the family forever, since they were born. They've been indoctrinated into the family. You need to break that indoctrination. You need to break that chain that binds them into the cycle of that clan.
I don't know if it's over with. We can only hope that the violence is over with and that we can help the kids that want to be helped, and that we can keep the ones locked up that are determined that Erbil's doctrine was right. I don't know that the violence is ended. We can only hope so.